Thank you, everybody. This is a very different talk than I'm used to giving. In fact, it's very different than I'm used to attending. One of the things that I've been tired of lately is going to talks at conferences that are really just sales pitches veiled as presentations. And I own a company named Transmedia. I hope you will consider us a success after this, but it may not survive. So we'll see. What I will get into first is that it is true that this past year I sued the government. Fortunately, I won that case. It was with the Nova Scotia Supreme Court, and it was a pretty long ordeal. What really is the crux of the topic of that lawsuit was that we entered a market creating interactive digital media, and we built many interactive digital media products. We thought that their advertising was going to be covering that, but it turns out that what they really wanted was a much smaller subset called console video games, and definitions are very nebulous in this region. So what we did was take them to court and say, you know, the words interactive mean something, and we would like you to apply the dictionary definition. It turns out that you can do that. You can ask us to impose dictionaries upon regulations and policies. So it's nice to see that we got that through. In the process, it nearly bankrupted the company. And what we learned in the process is that, you know, there are some victories that are worth winning and some that may not be. But it also sort of asked us, well, why did this happen? Weren't we doing everything correctly? And in many ways we were. I mean, when we come to what this whole tax credit was meant to be, was that it was meant to be innovative, encouraging innovation, creating a new market, and we thought, okay, let's look around and see, you know, whether or not we're being innovative. And people like Barack Obama here have even said some powerful words about innovation. See, this is actually taken from the White House website, which is the first step in winning the future is encouraging American innovation. Can you imagine anything better than winning the future? All we've got to do is just get that innovation together. And so innovation is great, right? And there's no downside to innovation. And I can show you many different graphics that show this. This is the White House's graphic, which shows that all we need to do is invest in promote market-based innovation, catalyze breakthroughs, and then boom! Out the top of the pyramid shoots innovation for sustainable growth. There are other ones like this. Look at this chart. It shows that successful companies have innovative strategies. Unsuccessful companies do not have innovative strategies. So, these kinds of things are what innovative strategies are. If you search for innovation, you're going to find graphics like these. You can see that it involves leadership, creative teams, all these different buzzwords in there. Oh, we've got charts galore. This one just shows us we need to have commitment, find the right talent, we've got to make sure we know our purpose, and boom, we've got our strategy. This is the WE approach. You can see that innovation in this case involves value realization, ideation, selection. Everything just sort of turns and turns, and at the end we have an innovation culture. This one goes even further. It says, here we go. We start with innovation, maybe have a strategy, but boom, success, guaranteed. We can't go anywhere except success. This one, we just turn cranks. We just turn the creativity, and out comes success. This one I particularly like because it tells us just there are only two things required. You know, do you have enthusiasm and do you have focus? Because nothing else will ever go wrong. This one I like, and I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but the point is that there's an innovation engine that people are sorting through light bulbs here to see which ones are the absolute best, and then they gift wrap them at the end and they shoot out gold bars. You just use those gold bars to fuel the next iteration of this engine and you're solid. So my last version of innovation, I like to call this the rainbow to results, where we just say, okay, well, we want something. We just want to go, okay, well, what's the right path to take? How do we get there? Boom, we land in the majestic land of wonderful results. except I was more interested in the sharks that are swimming in this uncharted water underneath, and the fact that no one seems to be referencing them. This entire presentation is going to be covering just these sharks. And so I welcome anyone who would like to see a pro-innovation discussion to let me know. I'll give that talk another day, but right now I think it's important for us to recognize that these sharks exist, and we've got a few. Now, when we wrote up this presentation, part of it was going to be Transmedia Tales of Woe. All of the projects that I'm going to allude to are projects that I've done in the transmedia field. My company, our innovation, I suppose, is that we do transmedia storytelling, and I'll talk about why that term is loaded and not in later slides. But transmedia's got its own ridiculous charts, which is to say that here's how you make transmedia. You just take a bunch of things and just put them all in a center voice bubble or something, and then the conversation is transmedia. Again, it's a theme that we're seeing. It's just the only thing that we're missing is connecting lines, sort of a pile of stuff, and now you're in the middle of it, and success. So it even got down to the point where people were just making tongue-in-cheek charts like this. Is this transmedia? Is this not? And people started to really chafe against the term and the buzzwordiness of it all. And the only chart that I've seen lately that has been useful to me is one like this. This is from Robert Pratton, and it shows that I hope what it's showing is that if you make things without any consideration for how they relate to other things, you get a pile of stuff. You can see at the top the idea that authors and movie directors may not be working together, and they don't match in the creative communities that they offer to fans. But in a transmedia world, the idea is that things can become greater than the sum of their parts, and all you need to do is design with the intention of interlocking these things and creating something that is a greater whole. So that's the one step I'll take into transmedia for all those who may have come for it, and in the question period I'm happy to go through much more for you. But today's talk maybe should have been called The 5 Major Reasons Your Innovative Plan is Going to Fail, and all of which have happened to me at some point in the last decade of my career, so I feel like I'm speaking from some experience on this, and I really am excited to go through it because so many times you just sort of mumble your way through that part of the project when you're presenting it in public, and now I really get to embrace it. The first is a clear example about how this appeared in our government lawsuit. People want to encourage outside of the box thinking. They want innovation to be outside the box. And the problem with that is that the box is built for a reason. This is a wonderful graphic to show you how that's not how you win tic-tac-toe. That's not the rules of the game. And sure, you may be thinking outside the box and finding a creative solution, but when the box is rigid and that's the way you win or lose, you find yourself on the other side of things like tax credit regulations, policy that doesn't allow your project to exist. And I think that it's wishful thinking, and I'm excited about thinking outside the box, but we have to acknowledge that the box has reasons. The second variation on this is to live outside the box of what's actually possible. And I've been there too. This is the Newton and the iPad. I think that people can talk about this being more about being at the right place at the right time. I mean, there are some things that are just technically not able to happen because of technical innovation, because of the way that things are structured. We're having a really interesting time with the whole shift of television to move beyond regions and language barriers and things like that. There are just boxes that exist in our culture. And what is really crucial here, especially when you're considering the technical, is the way out of this is the proof of concept. Having the proof of concept has always been a term. Now a lot of people are calling it the minimum viable product. But the proof of concept gets you past this this is sort of low-hanging fruit of failures. You can get past this if you can show that it actually will work, making it once. The opposite of this is being in the right place at the right time and being that iPad. But I think you can see, even from this example, that even if you're not in the right place at the right time, if you're slightly ahead of the curve, that's not the end of the world. You can wait it out. There are stories like Avatar waiting out the graphics rendering engines that they needed to wait for. Netflix got on board with this bizarre DVD mailing system because they always knew that digital distribution was coming, and they just knew that they needed to get in front and have a stopgap before they could get to their ultimate distribution with broadband everywhere. Those kinds of stories can be overcome. So we're starting at the beginner steps of innovation failure. This one is one that I think people discount, which is that also there are boxes in our world that are budgetary. And especially if you like to get paid or to pay the people that work with you, it's really important that you understand that there aren't just loose wads of cash floating around for innovative thinking that is not fitting a certain criteria. Departments like marketing, there are departments like research and development, there are new product development teams, there are boxes that exist in corporations and in our different organizations that have budgets to do things. And if you don't figure out where your project lives, you're going to find yourself outside the box, aka not getting paid to do this. So you've got to help people to guide things, and when you refuse to classify things, it means that the people whose job it is to classify can't help you. So then we shift. We've gone from outside the box, and now we're to a new territory. The next way that I have unfortunately had project work against us is that you end up crossing a line. You cross cultural lines, social lines, and you end up inadvertently doing something that derails the project because it becomes the defining moment of the project. The example that we have is that we're working on a children's project right now, and one of our great ideas was to telephone children and play audio recordings for them. And what turns out is you can hear it now and laugh, but it's a cultural line. Anyone who's a parent will tell you that if the phone rings, my 6-year-old is not meant to pick it up and listen to a strange voice talking in a fictional world. And we need to get around that. And so the reason that this is so disruptive is because it's those kind of deal breaker moments, is that people already are trying something new for the first time, and if you don't treat with respect that sort of line of, okay, I'm willing to go with you down this path, but as soon as you cross a cultural line, it's a no-go for me. Even worse, and yes, something that did happen to me, is you cross a legal line. You can get yourself into situations where you do something that is so new that the law doesn't have a way to deal with it, or you can do something that is just so outside the normal realm that you're setting precedent. Sure, I love going to court, but the more importantly, you are setting something up for liability. That's another piece of the legal puzzle, and there are examples like this, not projects that I've done, but projects where geocaching, if you're familiar with it, will send you to locations. Those locations can sometimes be dangerous. People can fall and harm themselves, and then the question is, well, who's liable for that? You ask that person to go to that location for part of your project. There are other examples that I could quote if I was allowed to. There is a certain mouse-oriented company that hired a project that added this signing up participants and signing over something called reverse life rights, which it turns out is not really a thing, but is an interesting discussion that I can go into much later than this. Perhaps that'll be our discussion afterwards. So it's about the hijacking, is crossing these lines, the whole conversation. It's no longer about when is your deadline, what is your budget. who is your audience, the normal metrics. You cross some of these lines, and then you find yourself now having to defend a project during the time that it's an active launch and production, and it's just a complete distraction when it comes to these things. So you need to be respectful of it. In each of these, I don't know if you've heard, but I've been offering a few solutions for them. This one, my answer to this one is you've got to figure out who's your lawyer. Are they smart? Are they great? Do they understand what's going on? Can they predict what these sorts of things are? And you've got to have somebody who will think in the way that this new legal murky situation when it comes to digital privacy and all these things come up. Usually what they're doing is making their best guess. The problem with that is that when you have a legal team, the law is not built to make best guesses. They're not giving the benefit of the doubt and saying, well, this is the way that I think we can deal with making sure that this legal line is not crossed. And so instead of that, I need to protect my client, and I'm going to make sure that none of the things that are actually innovative will happen in this project. And I've had this happen a couple of times where you write the creative brief, you've submitted it, everybody loves it, it's the most ambitious project to date, they know it's going to make a big splash in the market, and then it's like, oh, we'll just vet it through legal and just see how that goes, and it just comes back and it's like a website, and you say, well, it's not really going to achieve any of the objectives that we set out at the beginning because it's been completely shut down, and so there are times when lines can't be crossed, but there are also times when you end up trying and you find that you are unable to cross those lines. And when you do that, your innovative project fails because it's just not innovative anymore. So then we shift. This is another example. The way that we get away from not crossing any lines is that we make sure that the whole team understands why, and that includes the legal team and part of it. Everybody's got to know why we're doing this project, and if you don't do that, it's not just that department, it's everybody. If you've got a team that doesn't 100% understand what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and making those decisions on the fly, you're going to find yourself steering in a lot of different directions all at the same time. And this is the parable of the blind man and the elephant, of everyone sort of feeling their particular local influence and saying this is a wall, this is a hose, this is a flag, all the things that people think when they're feeling a piece of the elephant and nobody's seeing the elephant as a whole. And they're not working together, they don't understand how the bigger picture fits in. There are thousands of small decisions that get made in innovative projects because you are always blazing new ground, and you need to know that those decisions are towards some common goal. The problem with this is that when you're doing something new, it's very hard for people to understand what it is because there's nothing you can point to and say it's just like that. The reason that it's easy to explain what an elephant is because we've seen other elephants. This is, if we were talking about a completely new creature and you weren't able to pull from your memory bank, you'd be very hard pressed to imagine it in a way that's consistent with everyone else's vision of it. And so, solution to this I've found is that iterative approach. Is that if you can build something that says this is it, now we're going to build a better version of it, now we're going to build a better version of it, and people then can have something to grasp onto, and they can have a whole that they're working towards. So every time they're doing something, they're just adding to it. They're not trying to work in those, I guess, those silos together. So then other things can happen. So in the previous case, I think you've got to take responsibility for your team and the fact that everybody's got to be ready and on the same page to work together. But it doesn't mean that there aren't things that can come out of the blue that completely change the game. One of these examples is that, the big one for me is when you try to figure out that actually the wrong people are taking on the roles. There's roles I mean, that's perhaps a hiring thing, but the big one for us is when the wrong person says yes and they don't know they're the wrong person. There have been a number of examples where, for instance, if I go back to the other example, we have the creative team completely excited about the new project, how groundbreaking it's going to be, how daring it's going to be, and what they don't know is that they're not in charge. That there's going to be that legal department that takes over and changes the whole scope of the project, and you have to understand that architecture of where are the approvals coming, and sometimes it's an impenetrable wall. It's great when you actually can punch through that and say, no, I want to see how this is going to all get approved. But sometimes they really don't understand how something like this is going to deal with their departments. For instance, I was talking about the boxes of R&D and marketing and stuff. If you're stepping outside of those norms, people don't have policies for that, and sometimes these policies can come back and bite you in that your team can't quite get to the yes that you need to get to. So my example for this is that the only way that we've figured this out is to get things in writing. That's the only success metric that we've figured out, because at least then you can show people that it's not your fault. Because it's so often that it comes together and people just sort of get into a he said, she said moment there. And it's unfortunate because it means that you have to have this kind of defensive posture in your team, which doesn't help the relationship, but there are moments where it's important. The next that you need to remember is that your audience can also get confused. This, for me, is actually the most disappointing way that a project has failed or not succeeded, or whichever you want to call it, which is that the audience just didn't get it. And they just didn't see how it was supposed to work, or they didn't see how you saw it was going to be so great. They just didn't feel it like you felt it. And it's mostly because the mental maps, the mental models that they have just don't match. You are completely in another planet, and there is a solution for this. This is actually a really easy one to figure out, which is that this is what user experience design is about. This is the whole crux of what usability and user experience design is that it's a question of, wait a minute, this is your fault. You didn't actually talk to anybody. You went off on your own and created some bizarre alternate universe where everything was innovative and everyone understood that, and nobody gets what you're talking about because you're way too deep down that rabbit hole. So the downside of this is nobody actually pays for stuff that they don't understand, and nobody signs up for things that they don't get, and you end up with nobody, and you think that it's because people don't like it. Because there's only really two reasons that they wouldn't do it, and three if they don't find out about it, so that's another issue. But people either don't want to sign something up for something, or they just don't understand what the heck it is, and therefore it's valueless. So it's so important, and often it's about allocating your resources incorrectly, is that you get so obsessed with building something that you forget to get your head out of the desk that you're working at, and think about how to show people how it's valuable, how to get that message across that this is an important thing. So that's for all the user experience designers in the room. The other is that it's equally problematic. It's a little more nuanced, is that your audience can also be confused because it's already become a success. And when things become a success, they create communities. And sometimes those communities can become your worst enemy, is because you are creating an experience for a newcomer, but what's actually well established is a deep, thriving community that has a legacy behind it and is a very intimidating place for most people. And so, this is about your new audience being confused. The reason I use Anonymous here is that I don't know if anyone's decided to become a part of Anonymous, but it's incredibly challenging when you decide to join a subculture that has different tiers of authority and agendas, and seems to be very flat but also is very exclusive, and where is it, and all these things. This isn't one example of how a hardcore audience has created a barrier through their culture. There's conflict that comes when those communities mix, when people try to explore something for the first time versus if they want to have that repeat experience. You can think about that in gaming culture. There's a big barrier to entry. We were talking about multiplayer, for example, is that trying out a game for the first time in multiplayer is very intimidating because you're not sure who you're up against, and those people have a great wealth of experience. So what I would offer as a solution to this is that you need to build in those kind of tiers of engagement. You need to bring people through a path that gets them to a community where they've been well prepared, the kind of training levels for your experience or whatever it is that project's about. This one is easy. I like this one because I've got a great answer for it, which is that you just have to do your homework, but you say that and you still fall prey to it. There are so many times that you think you're doing something for the first time, and it's a big world out there, and there's usually somebody who's thought of it for you, and you should really think twice about feeling like you're the first to do much of anything anymore. This is a problem in the sense that everyone that you tell about this project is going to compare it to the other projects that came before it. And if you think that you're going to make your mark on being the first on something, you've just lost all of your clout in the conversation because you're not the first, and there are examples to prove it. And so the thing about it is that you can get around this. I mean, I don't want to talk you out of everything. I'll talk you out of most of it. But what I want to show you is that this is actually just something you have to acknowledge and say, okay, I need to know what's out there. I need to know how I'm slightly different every time, and you're going to get asked it a lot, every time somebody brings up that project and says, but isn't it just this? You've got to have an answer. And if your answer is, I didn't know about that, then you are in some serious trouble. The other thing about it is that there is a bizarre fascination in the technical world, thank you, bizarre technical fascination with the newness of functionality, and there's a complete discrediting of the newness of creative content. It's so bizarre for me to watch films being covered and television shows being talked about in the press because they're new. This is an exact duplicate of the situation comedy format, and it has 3 commercial breaks, and it is exactly like every sitcom you've ever seen, but there's new actors in it, and the plot's a little different, so it's new. But in the startup community, we can't do that. We can't have another one in the sort of language that we've created, and I think that we need to change that, is that we need to remember that things can be new in a lot of different ways, and that you're not always worried about reinventing the wheel. Sometimes you're just making a new type of wheel. You're making, that your wheel takes you different places. There's differences that can come from these things, and having work before you is actually a good sign that you're building on something. You're not just coming out from left field. The one that I haven't figured out, this is the one I would love to hear advice on too, which is that when you start doing new stuff, you've got to come up with names for it. And for an example, one of the names that people have started calling some of this about interlocking stories in different media is to call it transmedia. And one of the things that happens is that nobody patents that. You can't copyright trademark ideas. I suppose you can trademark, but nobody really does when it comes to talking about what you're making. You have to have a common language for people. And when people start to enter the market, there's good people and there's bad people, and people do things that are really great, and people do things that are kind of terrible. And one of the things that you have to be ready for is that whatever your innovation is, let's say it's social media, that you're creating something, you've got to first acknowledge that there's social media that came before you, but then you also have to be figuring out how you're going to cope with the fact that 30 other companies, social media companies, they're going to do it horribly. And they're going to really, really jade the community out there against the words. So that when you say, I make social media, or I make transmedia, or whatever it is, people are not actually thinking, oh, I like that. They're remembering all the times like, I tried that, it stunk, and now I'm just whitewashing everything that I ever hear with that term again as terrible, and so your project sucks. I haven't looked at it. But that's something that I'm still working on, and the thing that people have been doing is just coming up with new words. They're just coming up with new terms to describe what it is that they do so that they can differentiate on definitions and not on the content of things. They can say, no, I don't do transmedia. I actually make located media, or whatever the heck my bio says these days. And so they come up with these different definitions so that they can distance themselves from projects that they dislike and say, no, I'm unique. Don't put me in with the good and the bad. But it's an interesting cultural thing that we've got, because we acknowledge that there are bad books, but we don't judge all books by their nomenclature. And I think that might be a moment of maturity that needs to come about in an industry, but it's something to note, because projects can be tainted by other projects that have nothing to do with it. And the biggest one that I'm going to talk about today, this is actually the last example, and then we'll get into a review period. So I'm going to put this presentation up online if you guys want to be able to refer to it. I know some of you have been furiously taking notes. And so in this one, I think this is the one that people need to really pay attention to the most. Number one issue facing people who think that they've got the first mover advantage is that someone's going to copy you. They will do it better because of all the things that first mover advantage have to it, is that it's just harder to do something first. You're always coming up against the same things. First of all, when you do something for the second time, you are immediately given a proof of concept. You are immediately shown that an audience exists for this product. You are immediately shown all the different ways that someone who wasn't paying attention might fail. And you just start from so much further ahead. It's actually shown that markets that enter, companies that enter a market second, usually have about 60% of the costs up front to launch their new initiative than the first mover. And so there are things in place to protect first mover advantages. There's a patent system, a copyright system. There's all these different legal frameworks that acknowledge that it's very difficult to do new things. It's difficult because those don't really protect concepts, and so those are interesting places. But what I think you need to take away from this is being first can't be your only strength. If you don't have any other advantage, somebody can take first away pretty quickly, because all of the other things that are important about projects, like quality, convenience, all of the things that you would think of, are available to everyone else in that market. You have not, your only differentiation is that you were there first, and without a legal framework, what you end up being is you become somebody else's R&D department. Companies spend 10 to 15% of their budgets doing research and development, and there are actually examples. I mean, you can look at a great Wired article about Airbnb, which has a competitor that launches almost an exact duplicate of Airbnb. And so the question is, what makes Airbnb powerful? Is it the network effects of having a large pre-established base? Is it their user experience? Is it the brand loyalty that people have? Is it the reviews? There's questions where you start to say, okay, now what value can I have that keeps me ahead of the curve? So you got to understand how you're going to stay ahead, or the alternative is to realize that you never need it to be first anyway. That's a big step to take out of it, is that if you don't care about that for a bunch of different reasons, one is you're not trying to do it long term. All you wanted to do was just be first, get a big press attention, and then get out the door. Or you're just interested in a specific niche of the market that is not necessarily something that people are going to be thinking of as something that you want to take on. So there's a lot of different examples. I love this graphic of just, man, I feel so bad if those guys were at the same cosplay, because who's taking pictures of number one over here? Sorry. The review period here is that I've broken it down into kind of 5. I've got a lot of subcategories beyond that, but essentially these are the different things that I've covered today. I was trying to look through 10 years of my experience and break it down and see what I could offer in terms of advice. And so these is the short list here. I hope it's valuable to you. I was worried though that I might scare you guys. The scare I thought I might give you is that if you look at the statistics, the universe is leaning quite heavily in favor of failure. And the example stat here is that, I don't know if you've heard of Y Combinator. I would argue that they're perhaps the most successful startup incubator in the world. When you calculate all the people who apply to Y Combinator, and it's a significant process to put together a concept that they would review, their success rate is 0.4%. The companies that become multi-million-dollar companies out of that incubator, which is their definition of startup success, is 0.4%. So to put that in context, if you are in the United States and you get on the high school football team, your chances of being drafted to the NFL are twice as likely as Y Combinator's success rate. The way it breaks down is that of all the people who are drafted in the NFL, it's 0.8% of all the people who are in that year of high school, high school. So we've got a 99.2% failure rate for NFL draft picks, but we've got a 99.6% failure rate for Y Combinator applicants. So we have a dramatic lean towards that, and it's important that you see that there are lots of different ways that these people very innocently go down those paths. So what we've learned today is that you should never try anything. But it made me ask myself, why would I do this? And why have I done it for 10 years? And the question is, why would we want to be first? There are amazing stories about what happens to innovators. Dr. Frankenstein created the first, reanimated life, and look how he did for it. We have many examples of innovation gone awry and how people don't quite understand how innovation affects the world and themselves. So my question is, what motivates that? And when it came down to it, and I'm missing a picture. When it came down to that, what I felt, what you're seeing here in X is the Mars rover, the Curiosity rover that's exploring the surface of Mars. And what it came down to me is that we just need to do it. We are explorers. We need the novelty of it, and I certainly do. And we crave improving things. We crave changing things. We're always interested in, can we do this? This is not something, despite failure rates, this is not something we're going to get rid of. And, getting a robot to Mars to take photographs, what's on Mars? Why would we do that? Well, we just had to do it. and it, we have a long, long history of exploration. We're not innovating now in some startup craze because it's new. We're constantly discovering new lands, discovering new things, finding out more about the world. It's built in. And so I don't see it happening. The interesting thing for me is the ethics of exploration and the ethics of, do we see all innovations and innovators in a positive light? And I think that there are some times where that shifts and people say, well, maybe we took a step too far. Maybe we crossed a line here. Maybe we are the colonizers and less the explorers. So you've heard stuff like this before, fail early and fail often. It seems to be inevitable because that's just the numbers game behind it. But if you embrace it, it's a different case, because I think that failing early has a really interesting charge to it, is that we're trying to recognize failure early, not just fail early, because you always recognize failure late. And the reason that I wanted to share this talk with you today is because I really feel like there's no way I'm going to be able to do my whole career where all the failure just is just for me, where it's just the lessons for me. And I think it's the same with science for me, is that if one person working in one laboratory doesn't share their discoveries with the rest of the world, that we're never going to be able to progress as people and to move forward. So I think that what we really need to think of is that we've figured out that this is just the scientific method, is that I've given you a couple of examples of things that have affected us, which I think now will inform probably your decisions moving forward on different projects. And we're going to get to that next thing. I bet there's other ways that things can go awry that I haven't discovered yet. And I'm sure that I would be very pleased if some of you would share those with me. You heard me earlier talk about presentations where the whole presentation is about the strengths of the project, and there's veiled message behind it, which is you need to hire me because I'm amazing. What I think today's talk might end with is you need to hire me because I already figured all this out. There is some serious value of 10 years of this going on. There is quite a lot of scientific knowledge behind that, and perhaps now you've got it all, but trust me, I've seen pieces of that still have those values. But the point about it is that we have this real hesitation to show failure. Fail early and fail often is a mantra that is missing one piece, which is tell people about it and share that with others, because those stories are the things that will make us better, and they will make it not 0.4% of your life will be a success, but 0.4% of everyone's life will be a success, which is a lot more. You would be shocked. And once we get through the science of it, we get inspirational quotes like this. You can see, I'll read it out. It's one of my favorite Transmedia authors, and you can ask me all about that later. But Kurt Vonnegut Jr. tells us that we have to be continually jumping off cliffs and developing our wings on the way down, which I think is just bullshit. Because even this guy doesn't believe it. He's wearing a parachute. And I think maybe there's a 0.4 success rate when it comes to growing wings on the way down, but I would go with the odds on that, and it's not the way I would choose to advise the world. I think it's a very romantic notion, but I think we have to plan to fail. And I don't think there's a problem in that, is that if you plan, then you make sure that you can survive it. And surviving failure is the only thing that's valuable in it ever. So, the idea of taking yourself right to the brink because you're so passionate about something that you're willing to risk it all. Risking it all may work, but wouldn't you like to survive another day to risk it all again? So don't fail completely, and think about exit strategies that are not always being bought out for millions of dollars. Think about exit strategies. Say, at what point am I going to say that this is too far? At what point am I going to say, let's step back and look at this project with a new eye? How many different ways can you think of that require you to sort of adjust your worldview when it comes to these projects? And what I want you to leave this talk with is a couple of points. One is, wow, Evan really made a lot of mistakes. This is quite a lot of slides on failure. Two, he's still here after a decade, so that's comforting. Three, perhaps it's because it's a skill to see these problems and get ahead of them. And four is, now you have that skill too. So aren't you glad that you came? I think we're going to wrap it up there, and we'll chat about it.